Well, we're here today to talk with Larry Sanders about a time in American history that many people don't know a lot about, the Cold War. So, Larry, who was involved in the Cold War and what was the main conflict?
Well, the stars of the Cold War, of course, was the Soviet Union versus the United States. And that initial core of the conflict expanded to include all the communist countries, the totalitarian forces versus the forces of freedom, which was the United States and all of its allies. And they combined to form a worldwide conflict that we refer to as the Cold War.
So during the Cold War, what was the atmosphere of America? What was the attitudes of her citizens towards our conflict?
Well, there's a lot of paranoia, a lot of nervousness, a lot of extreme anxiety, and of course that reached its highest point during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but that was actually predicated by a much earlier event that terrified America, and that was when the Soviet Union successfully launched the first communications satellite, Sputnik. And although Sputnik was a very humble, small orbital vehicle, it basically allowed the Soviet Union to announce to America that we have the capability to launch an orbiting vehicle, and that translated into the ability to fire a nuclear weapon to the United States. And that started this entire race to have the best intercontinental ballistic missiles. And that was what basically led to the creation of the Atlas ICBM.
So, growing up in this time, in this era, how did it influence your childhood, your upbringing?
Every aspect of life in America was influenced by the Cold War. Growing up outside of Manhattan, New York, we always consider ourselves to be ground zero in addition to Washington, the two major population centers. And even though we weren't the center of government at that time, being the largest city in America made us almost confident that we would be targeted in a significant way. But all across America, there was this fear of annihilation by thermonuclear weapons. So as I was growing up in that environment on a regular basis, today we have fire drills in schools. When I was growing up, we had our nuclear attack drills. And on a regular basis, when I was younger, we had the duck and cover drill. So we'd get on our knees and crawl under our desks for protection. Later on, we would carry our chairs into the hallway and put our chairs facing lockers and put our head against the locker, and that would be our drill for preparation for a nuclear attack. And of course, that was an absurd scenario because that would not have saved a soul, but that was something that made mom and dad comfortable that the schools were investing in our safety. We used the duck and cover concept. We saw movies about if we were out in the open, how to hide behind a building, how to get off our bicycles and jump into a hole, find protection behind a tree, all these different sequences of preparation and keeping us safe from a thermonuclear blast. And that was a part of school. Every child was, drilled in that routine. And we had public awareness as well. We had drills on a regular basis. They tested the siren system. We had these drills to get off the street into a home to be protected from an explosion. Especially in the metropolitan areas, that was a regular part of the training of the public, was how to survive a massive attack. And that really did set the mood in America, and it kept us consistently on the edge. So we were interested in what was happening in terms of the development of military systems. We were interested in the politics, the allies, where their posture was in terms of being ready for attack. And also we were always looking at the other enemies, in addition to the Soviet Union, China, North Vietnam, and other totalitarian countries that we feared would be a part of that attack.
So in the other totalitarian governments in their race to build up their arms, we as America had to respond in kind. How did our first programs, our first military programs and missiles come into being? Who created it and why?
Well, that was a very linear process, progress in terms of technology capabilities. And the early systems were very primitive, basically spin-offs of weapons that were developed by the Nazis during World War II. We were fortunate enough to get the best of the German scientists to assist us in the rapid development of our ICBM systems and the early intermediate range ballistic missiles. The spin-offs of the Buzz bomb, for example, which was a guided weapon that had an intermediate or short range, and that led to more and more and more aggressive systems. It was a very, very costly development. And in fact, in the early parts of the Cold War, there was no limit to the money invested in developing these systems. And there was a lot of internal conflict, politically as well as in the military arms. The Navy wanted their role, the Air Force wanted theirs, the Army insisted on having their nuclear weapons, and these costs just escalated more and more and more. But there was not a resistance on the part of Americans about the investment in these weapons because they felt that there was absolutely a necessity for our survival. We had to have them if we expected to stay alive.
So one of the programs that was developed was the Atlas ICBM. And you came into ownership of one of such bases. What was that base's history? What use was it had? What were the stories that it experienced?
Well, when I came to Abilene as a student at Abilene Christian, I became aware of the fact that Dyess Air Force Base had hosted this particular military mission. And I was fascinated to find these sites and explore them and learn more about them, but was stunned as a new resident to this area to find out that such recent Cold War history had been totally forgotten by the folks that lived in this area. And there was no awareness of their locations, and it took years for me to finally find out where all these Atlas sites were. And of course that shocked me even more because I knew these were monumental in terms of their scale. Each of these silos were 18.5 stories underground by approximately 52 feet across. Massive structures. And I couldn't believe that something so extreme in terms of its scale, its investment, its innovation, and its significance to world history had been totally forgotten by a host community. So that was my motivation for exploration and determining where these sites were and early investigation of those sites. And it helped me realize something so significant had been totally forgotten, not only by the folks that lived very close to them, but by all of Texas, and to a greater extent had been forgotten by America. And that was my initial motivation for preservation, because these were so significant historically that we couldn't allow that history to disappear, nor allow these sites to go back to Mother Nature. So that's how I got involved in Atlas preservation.
So in your research and exploration of the Atlas missile base, did you come across any stories particular to the Abilene sites that were particular importance?
Absolutely. I mean, as the history of the sites unfolded, I came across names of people who had been part of that history, individuals in our community that had been part of the recruitment of that mission, individuals that had worked for Convair and were a part of the original cadre of engineers and designers that created the program, installed those sites here. Contractors like Zachary Cement out of San Antonio, Brown and Root out of Houston, massive corporations that were engaged in the creation of these sites around Abilene. And because of the number of people involved in that process, you can't avoid coming across more and more individuals that were a part of that history. And I really did pursue that and asked the questions and got all the interviews I could possibly generate. And in doing so, learned more and more about that history. And by no long-range plan or intent on my part, through visiting with people and anecdotal absorption of that history, had become a national authority on that history.
And becoming such a national authority, what have been your experiences in other individuals' approach to learning and experiencing and researching more about such missile bases?
Well, two factors. First of all, I've had authors and writers approach me asking for the information, and we've had a large number of publications, articles, and stories, and television as well, generating stories from, discussing that history with me. Also, authors that have produced books, the history of the Air Force, history of Dyess Air Force Base, and a lot of Texas-focused television programming that have come out of those interviews as well. It's been amazing to me personally because I've had the opportunity to have people come into my life that are remarkable individuals, so talented in terms of their knowledge of history, in terms of their realm of experience in different systems, and taking advantage of their expertise and their skills have allowed me to learn a lot more, have been examples to me in terms of recordation, documentation, photographic recordation as well, and have been very, very, very inspirational for me.
You do seem to be quite the expert in the Atlas Missile Base ICBM program. In particular to your base, how did you acquire it? What improvements have you made to it, and what were the context of your acquisition?
Okay. Well, with the creation of the Atlas ICBM Historical Society in the 90s, we did a nationwide survey of sites and found the ideal site to acquire for the National Museum. However, we found out very rapidly that the enthusiasm that Texans showed for this historic preservation agenda wasn't shared nationwide. And we realized that we didn't have the resources to project that interest. So we came back to Texas with our tail between our legs and basically resigned ourselves to the fact that it was too lofty an ambition. So I was, just by happenstance, as I was working for the Texas Senate at the time, I was doing an economic development talk for the lawn community, for the lawn local government. And afterwards, the mayor approached me and asked, aren't you the guy doing all this Atlas history? And I said, yes, sir, I am. And he asked, why haven't you done anything with our site? And I explained in copious detail why I hadn't pursued the lawn site for a preservation agenda. But he said, well, you need to come out and take a look at it. And that weekend, the mayor and I broke into the lawn site, and he gave me a personal tour of that facility, and it was in horrendous condition. But he offered the site to me for a ridiculously low price. And I explained to him that as a Senate employee, and he is a local administrator, we'd both be in jail the following week if we pursued that agenda. But I told him I would get back with him and do a little research and find out how we could pursue an acquisition agenda. And made that presentation to the Lawn City Council about 3 months after our first investigation of the site, and proposed a 10-year lease to own process, and spending about 10 times the original price that the mayor had quoted to me. The city council was basically shocked that I would offer that kind of money for the site. But based on that proposal, the city council accepted my proposition and started making payments on it. And after a 10-year lease to own process, acquired the lawn site in its entire property area. And had 10 years basically to pay that off on a lease-to-own basis. And during that 10 years, it was still city property, so I didn't have to pay taxes on it, and had resources via the community that was a win-win situation for everyone. And at the end of the 10 years, I signed the contracts and property was mine. And it continues to be a one-man pyramid project, very, very costly for an individual, but it's really a dream come true for me. And even though the site requires a tremendous amount of work, tremendous engagement on the part of volunteers, individuals from Dyess Air Force Base, it is just a remarkable opportunity for preservation, for illumination of that history, for the state of Texas to become aware of its history, and an opportunity for me to engage numerous levels of government, volunteer organizations, and historic preservation professionals nationwide in the preservation agenda for the Atlas ICBM. When I acquired that site, it was in horrendous condition. You can imagine a house that sits empty for a year falls apart just about, but a subterranean environment, deserted for over 3 decades, it was in really, really bad shape. Plus, it had been visited on a regular basis by people breaking into it, destroying structures, spray painting, graffiti everywhere. And it was a real challenge to even get to the point where we could just say comfortably that we've wrestled this site from Mother Nature. It was so much more than that, and required a tremendous amount of work on the part of my family and a lot of friends to make that happen.
So in looking ahead to the future of your Lawn Atlas missile silo, what do you hope for it to accomplish in commemorating the Cold War and for future generations and such?
Well, we've accomplished several exciting things with the lawn site. First of all, in 2001, we dedicated the Atlas ICBM Highway. And that's the first honorary designation of a public thoroughfare for a Cold War mission. First time in America's history that we've had that type of honor. So we're calling attention to that heritage. The next step is for the Lawn Atlas Missile Base to become the interpretation site for the Atlas ICBM Highway. And we hope to accomplish that by making the Lawn Atlas Missile Base the first 20th century addition to the Texas Forts Trail. The Texas Forts Trail is a 50-year-old heritage tourism series of historic frontier forts. And the juxtaposition of the Lawn Atlas Missile Base as a component of that heritage trail is very interesting, because you have these 10 frontier forts and the 20th century edition, which is a Cold War era fortress, but it connects that history in a very unique way. And it calls to Texans' attention the fact that though it's not a frontier fort, it's a 20th century structure, it had exactly the same reason for being, and that was to protect the lives of Americans. And we can be proud in uniting and in pulling together this heritage, because it lets us focus on all of Texas military history in a significant way. And that's the ultimate goal for our preservation effort at Lawn, is to call attention to that heritage in the context of all of our military history in the state of Texas.
In closing, is there anything in particular that you want to draw attention to or emphasize about your particular base or your journey in approving and commemorating its role in history?
Well, I think the number one ambition is to call attention to the significant roles that people played, that Texans played in our victory in the Cold War. Unlike World War II and other military conflicts that have been celebrated in so many ways by authors, by events, by movies, etc., the Cold War is shockingly forgotten. It's the longest conflict in America's history, but yet we won it, and we never celebrated that victory. And as a result, the people that were a part of that victory were never recognized, nor were they honored appropriately. We have a lot of focus on battles within the context of the Cold War, for example, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and other conflicts that were tangential, connected to the Cold War, but we've never focused on all those individuals, not just military individuals either, civilian contractors, teachers, people in technology development. These were all aspects of the Cold War victory that we need to celebrate the lives of these people and make sure we've recognized them and honored them for their individual roles in that victory. And if we can accomplish that by focusing on aspects or military systems that were a part of the Cold War, we can elevate the importance of these individuals and celebrate their lives and give them the recognition that they deserve. And I think that's the ultimate ambition for any focus on the Cold War, is to make sure that people are aware of the people that were a part of that conflict and recognize them appropriately.
All right. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.